Cool. Welcome everyone to Metagov Seminar, our weekly research seminars here at Metagov, the Laboratory for Digital Governance. And I'm super excited to welcome Araba today to present on her work and her research on data for decision making. I can't even remember how and when I came across your work, Araba, but I remember just being absolutely blown away, thrilled, excited, inspired, um, basically consumed your entire book in the span of like 2 hours and have been referring back to it a lot ever since. So yeah, and we've had the privilege to connect and chat and go into it a little bit, but I'm really excited to bring you into the Metagov space. I know there's so many folks here who will be just, yeah, really excited about your research and will learn so much. So I'll let you introduce yourself and start your presentation. We'll give it about 20 minutes or so for you to present, and then we'll move into a hopefully usually very lively discussion and Q&A section. So I can help facilitate that. If folks have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type them in the chat or raise your hand on Zoom or just type the word stack and I'll add you to the kind of ranking or the like order of people and we'll go from there. So that's that and welcome Araba.
Thank you very much, Val. I'm going to try just share my screen now, and let's see which one. And I think it should be this. Okay. So is that showing okay?
Yes, it looks great.
Perfect. As Val said, I have been working in the area of data for decision making for a few years now, and I am currently Deputy Director at Research ICT Africa in Cape Town, but prior to that, for about 12, 13 years, I was at the University of Washington. In Seattle, which is where I did the work I'm going to talk about today. I am still based in Seattle. The project I'm going to discuss was a collaboration between two units at the University of Washington. One was the Technology and Social Change Group at the UW Information School, and the other being the Ocean Nexus, which is at the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs, also at the university. And so I was there from about 2019 to 2023 was when this project took place. And so I just want to say a little bit about the project that was the genesis of this the program that was the genesis of this project. So the broad framing of this was within the Ocean Nexus program, which is a program that seeks to provide guidance for the governance of oceans in the interest of social and human equity. And it has a broad framing of values of anti-racism. So this is being committed to taking action to dismantle systemic inequities within decision-making processes and their outcomes. Also a commitment to empathy, which is prioritizing the dignity and well-being of people to ensure that, in essence, in the research context, to ensure that relationships are more important than research outputs. And then decolonization, the third value, where the goal is to uplift the narratives of people that have been marginalized historically, and to promote trust building and sort of deconstruction of the prior inequities. So in today's presentation, I will sort of describe a little bit about this project, which we call OD4D, which is an inclusive ocean data for development project. I'll explain a little bit about the conceptual foundations of the project, touch just very briefly on the methodology, and then some of the key, takeaways, observations that we had from the project. A little bit about myself again. I just want to contextualize all this by saying that I am not a marine scientist. I am not a computer scientist. I'm a social scientist, and my interests have been in the relationship between digital and social inclusion and the impact of computing technologies on socioeconomic development, especially in Africa, but also around the world. I've been partly Western trained and partly non-Western trained. I come from a relatively middle class background in Ghana, where I was born and lived for most of my life. And so this has shaped the way that myself and my colleagues who worked on this project sort of engaged with the topic and the people that we worked with. I always like to note that we struggled with our own sense of identity. We've struggled with our awareness of our privilege in relation to some of the communities that we're interested in. We've struggled with the inclusiveness of our own practice, even though we're trying to promote inclusiveness ourselves. And even our authority to talk about topics like inclusion, indigenous methods, traditional knowledge, coming, as I said, from a place of having been partially Western trained. So I don't claim to be an expert on these topics. However, I do hope that our reflections and suggestions would be useful to anyone that's seeking new ways or different ways to fully collaborate with the communities that you want to work with, despite the associated risks and challenges of this. So I'm hoping that today we will have, maybe more conversation, and just sharing ideas, especially to get your thoughts on whether you think these ideas make sense. So the overall purpose of the project was to explore ways to foster data-based marine decision-making processes that are more inclusive and representative of the different realities of people in coastal communities. A key observation that we had made from the literature that we looked at was that, as well as our own lived experiences, actually, was that many groups, such as those that are less educated, less wealthy, do not fully participate in the processes that generates the knowledge that policymakers use to make decisions. And yet these groups are often the ones that are most affected by those decisions. So they may be negatively affected by the changes to the marine environment, but then they're also negatively or most negatively affected by the policies that are enacted to address the issues of marine protection. So that was one of the things that we felt needed to change, and we were thinking about whether it's possible for all aspects of knowledge generation to be inclusive. And in this particular instance, when it comes to research, of course, research is specialized, right? So you need to know how to do research. You need to have a particular set of skills. But again, we're wondering, is it possible to include communities throughout the research process, not just at particular stages? The other thing we noted was that most of the existing resources to teach data skills, not targeted at small organizations. They tend to be targeted at large business-oriented, well-resourced organizations. And they rarely consider issues of equity and social justice. And finally, we had also observed that there's a general tendency for scientists to assume that traditional or indigenous knowledge is not science. And they tend to give that kind of knowledge credence only when it aligns with dominant Western sciences. So we wanted to see whether it's possible to encourage more acceptance of different ways of knowing and different ways of generating knowledge. So, and our idea was that, what this could lead to more inclusive processes that enable communities to have a stronger voice and be more comprehensively involved, as I said, in all aspects of knowledge generation for their decisions about the environment in which they live. Not only with respect to those decisions that others are making, but also to be able to do their own knowledge generation, separate from whatever is going on in the policymaking field. So to determine their own information needs and feed that into their own decision making, and be able to communicate these to the governing authorities that these are the things that we're interested in. This is the type of knowledge that we would like to have in order to govern our own environments. Now, I do want to say that this is not to say that scientists' expertise is irrelevant, but we do want to see the extent to which knowledge production can be, to some extent, democratized while still valuing the role of experts in particular knowledge areas. It's also not to say that communities' coherence or their practices are always right or the best. Indeed, the goal of this is to encourage communities to interrogate their own framings of participation, to avoid perpetuating other localized inequalities in decision-making. For example, it could be based on gender, socioeconomic status, and so on. So that those are also we recognize that. So the overall project approach to this was we try to engage with in-country organizations and individuals to jointly study community participation in marine decision-making processes, and then to use those outcomes to develop an adaptable training tool for community organizations. And this is the book that Val was referring to. So we started with some exploratory work in Hawaii, primarily interviewing scholars and community organizations to gain insights into the interaction between Western and indigenous science, and to test whether what we were trying to do even was relevant or appropriate. And then we collaborated with a scholar in Japan to explore oyster farmers' knowledge of and response to ocean acidification. And we have a case study in the book that summarizes some of what we learned. And then in Ghana, we examined efforts to protect marine mammals following a beaching event. And we've illustrated some of the findings for that in 3 case studies in the book. And so we used a range of methodologies, from literature reviews to interviews, surveys, focus groups, discussions, meetings, community engagements, and so on. We also had a running appeal for colleagues and partners to share with us any examples they encountered of truly inclusive or participatory research in coastal communities. And I throw that out to you all now because we are still trying to find those kind of examples. The last thing to note is that this was a practical project. So the goal was less academic in the sense of trying to generate new knowledge. What we wanted to do was try and generate something that was usable or could be used by community organizations. So our key takeaways, the first and I think foremost observation that we have is that using data to make decisions in an inclusive manner means seeking the highest possible level of community participation and incorporating realities, different age systems, different values at all stages of decision making. And to us, decision making includes the research or the knowledge generation processes that feed into the decision making process. So we're thinking of it from the point of determining what is needed, what needs to be investigated, what is the issue on which a decision needs to be made, right down to the collection of data to inform the decision, and then actually making the decision, and then monitoring the impacts of that decision. To what extent can we include communities in every stage of this process? Is it even possible? Our attempts to identify, really participatory projects that include communities as equal partners in the entire research process was, not very successful. We found few projects that we could say truly did that. And what we found is that community involvement is usually at the early stages to do some form of needs assessment. Then you go away, come back at the end to validate the results. If communities are involved in the process at all in the interim, it's usually in the form of labor. So they help with data collection, or they are key informants. They help you to get access to the areas that you want to get access to. But it was rare to find instances where members were participating in research design, deciding what types of knowledge information is important, contributing to data analysis and interpretation, and helping to develop decision options, for example. And this is despite the fact that these days it's generally agreed that stakeholder consultation and engagement is an essential part of any decision-making process. But I'm sure we all know that that is much easier said than done. Could be, for a variety of reasons, communities and social scientists, policymakers often have different data skills. For example, communities lack Western scientific knowledge, right? Scientists lack indigenous knowledge, so it's difficult for them to have a conversation. There's usually, as I said, a narrow framing of participation. So, communities only involved in a subset of the knowledge generation and decision-making process, and only, therefore being unequal partners in the process. Different divergent worldviews. So it's, again, very difficult for community members, for scientists, for policymakers to engage from each other's perspective. And in fact, often the burden is on communities, local communities, to acquire Western science skills. But you rarely find a situation where scientists are being asked or encouraged or motivated to learn local or non-Western methods and to understand those methodologies as well. Also, it could be that the communities are not interested in participating themselves, and I think I heard that discussed in one of your previous seminars, right? It could be for a variety of reasons. They could have had bad previous experiences with researchers, their community development agents in their communities. They could just not trust the process, or they simply don't have the time, the resources, the interest to participate. How do you deal with that? And then, this assumption that communities are homogeneous. So if you just pluck one person from the community and put them in your group, then you've achieved inclusion. Whereas, it is a fact that communities are very diverse. To get true representation, you might have to include a wider variety of people. So our emphasis, ultimately ended up being more on distinguishing inclusive decision-making from practices that end up only being superficially inclusive, even with the best intention of researchers sometimes, and they just don't end up being as inclusive as they meant to be. So these here, I won't go into this in too much detail. I think they're mostly self-explanatory. These are some of the key principles and values that we extracted from talking to people from the literature, and that these are some of the important things that would assist, in essence, almost in a mindset shift. If you want to be truly inclusive, you do have to achieve this shift in your mindset first. And these are some of the things that you would need to understand, recognize different forms of knowledge and ways of knowing, understand that relationships and relationality are everywhere. So you may be focusing on a particular issue, and as scientists, we usually have a very specialized area we're interested in, but understand that it's connected to a lot of other things, and you have to somehow always be aware of how what you do affects a lot of other aspects of society. Even if you can't do anything about it, be aware of it and what the implications might be. One of the things that I like, and I actually still struggle with how to really operationalize it, is the idea of knowledge and accountability. So we are accountable to the knowledge that we acquire and use, and the relationships that are embedded in that knowledge, which means respecting, the knowledge that has been shared with us, respecting the people that shared it with us, and the impact that the decisions we make based on what they have given us could have on them. So we have to somehow try and navigate that. And the last one here, all methods have validity. Could be, challenging for a lot of us, depending on how strongly you feel that particular methods, whether they're qualitative or quantitative or other other approaches, whether they are valid forms of research. Another important sort of mindset issue is being able to reflect on your position in relation to the people that you are working with and the knowledge that you are developing. So sort of that's one of the first steps in preparing your mindset, is to reflect on your place in the world, your identity, how it affects the way you see other people, how other people also, relate with you. So especially if you're trying to do development, if I come from Ghana originally, but whenever I go back to Ghana to work, I am aware that people see me sort of as a foreigner. They see me as somebody who is potentially bringing something to them. I have to figure out how to deal with that and make sure that that does not affect, or that I try to mitigate the extent to which this interferes with the level of inclusivity that I want to have. Because whatever I say, they'd be like, yes, or that would be the tendency, because they might think that, yeah, this person knows what they're talking about. They know better than I. They come from abroad, So again, sometimes you really have to, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you're trying to devolve, is that the right word? Yeah, and power to others, and there almost seems to be resistance. So you're
Oh no. I wonder. Oh,
I think I dropped off for a moment there.
yes, you
Am
did,
I
but
back?
yes.
Fantastic. Okay, sorry about that. So let's see if we can get back to where we were. And I think it was here. Hopefully I should be wrapping up soon. I'll go through them. I can see that I was a little bit over enthusiastic in my preparation, and so I have about 8 more slides, but I'll try and go through them quickly because I'd really like to have time for us to talk.
Awesome.
Um, so just moving on, very briefly, another issue to recognize is that decision-making cultures, that is the pattern of shared values and the behaviors that shape how decisions are made in a particular context, they differ across communities. So it's important for you to acknowledge what your decision-making culture is and how it might contribute to different types of exclusion. So if you prioritize in terms of participant experts versus non-experts, naturally non-experts are going to be excluded. What does that mean? If your approach to information is data-driven versus experience-driven, then people who are just saying that, well, your data is saying this, but this is what I personally experienced, are going to be excluded. How do you deal with that? Also, like I said, I think I've spoken about this now, people may not all want to participate. So with all these different ways and levels or degrees to which participation may happen, what do you want? You can meet people where they are in terms of just allowing them to participate to the degree that they do want to, or you can try to encourage higher levels of participation if that is important. The more positive experiences people have, the more value they will perceive in participating, and the more likely they will be to engage more. So now, how do you figure out who should participate and why? It's easy to see who has been included, but sometimes it's a bit tricky to identify who is not there because, of course, invisibility is not obvious. So how do we do this in a conscious manner? And this is a framework that I really like for that purpose of having some intentionality in how you think about who's missing, thinking about who's missing as voices, right? So not just bodies, but voices in the room, in whatever you're discussing. So the Tignani had proposed these different types of voices that you might think about, and whether or not you've accounted for them. Unknown voices, as I said, such as undocumented migrants, for example. They're invisible from the mainstream. Silent voices, such as, people with disabilities, maybe homeless populations, they're just not able to communicate what their realities and needs are. Muted voices might be people like refugees, in some contexts, women, children. Unheard voices might be, people that do not use technology. If your main methods of engagement are technology focused, nomadic populations that, it's just difficult to reach them. And ignored voices in the research context could be, for example, people that get folded into the other category when you're doing your data analysis. So we can talk about all the sort of the factors that contribute to these types of marginalization, which could range from the access to technology, the geographic location, their life circumstances, language, knowledge of particular subject matter. All these could lead to some forms of marginalization. So when trying to have that genuine participation, these are some of the prompts that we were thinking could help to make us more intentional in what we are trying to achieve with inclusion. So you're thinking about who is participating in the process and why them, right? What can you do to broaden participation? And I should say, what, if anything, can you do to broaden participation? Because you can't have everybody in the room, right? So you have to, in essence, exclude some people. The important thing is to understand why those groups are being excluded, and to see whether, even if they're excluded, right, then the next thing is, are there agendas, are there realities, are there interests and needs being represented? And so then you're asking the question, whose points of view, agendas are being prioritized, whose realities are reflected and whose are not. And then what can you do to broaden that representation or to mitigate that lack of representation? So we try to do the best we can to increase participation, increase representation. And if we cannot, then what can we do to ensure that that lack of participation or representation does not have negative impacts on the communities? So these, I won't go through this because I think you can go to the book and you'll see this is all like excerpts from the book, some sheets that help to think through how to identify the voices in your community, how to decide whether or not they should be included, how to ensure that if they're not included, they are represented, and how to then also ensure that once they are included, the inclusion is genuine, it's real. So I won't go to that. I want to just go to this being my last slide, where I just want to note that, in reality, as I said before, it's easier said than done. And we were not necessarily able to achieve all that we had wanted to achieve for this project. COVID-19, sort of just derailed completely our collaborative plans, because we wanted to actually go onto site in Japan, in Ghana, in Hawaii, and work with our partners there, but we could not travel. And so we had a lot less of that kind of inclusive practice that we ourselves had hoped for. Then one of the most expensive aspects of trying to be inclusive is time. And it takes a lot of time to build the relationships, to foster ownership among the partners. Like I said, sometimes you are trying to be inclusive, but the partners are not quite getting it because they're not used to, that kind of expectation that they really participate on an equal footing. We had, some struggles ourselves with ceding control. So it's like, yeah, I know this thing needs to be done this way, but the partners want to do it differently. And, you sort of have to say, yes, but I'm committed to this inclusiveness and I have to let them do things their way. One of the interesting things we found was just finding, non-Western imagery and being able to represent non-Western ideas, or to represent what I'd say are taken to be Western ideas, but might have some other manifestations in other cultures. So the example I like to use is the representation of an idea. So when somebody is representing an idea, it's usually immediately you think of like a light bulb. That's the imagery that, it seems like everybody understands. But then we're like, is it possible that there's a different way of representing this? Can we find a different way of representing that? We couldn't find anything online. We're trying to find, representations of communities, and we're just finding all these it's a little bit cringe-worthy, images. You see the people sitting around the tree, one of which I think I already showed, but that was a good one because it was funny. But you just have a group of women and sitting on the floor and with a flipboard, and we're like, are there possibly other ways, that these communities see themselves and might be represented? And so we struggled with some of these, and ultimately, as you'll see from the book, we turned to an artist in Hawaii to get some images that we felt would contribute to a broader range of imagery on the issues that we have. But I think it's really interesting that it's difficult to find non-Western imagery related to research concepts. And I'd be interested to know if, in your community, you have any ideas about what that might look like. I think I will stop here. Gone well over time, and look forward to hearing your questions and having a discussion. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Araba. Um, yeah, if you came late also and didn't get the link to the book, I'll make sure I send it again in the chat. But something I love about the book is how it is so participatory with so many worksheets and ways of kind of interacting with this material and trying it out and testing it out. So, I'm sending the link in the chat, and I would be really interested and excited to kind of bring some of those worksheets maybe into another session. We could talk about like how we've all, yeah, just kind of get into this material and practice ourselves would be really awesome. But
I would absolutely love that. Yes,
cool.
I'm looking for a way to test this, looking for a way to figure out, is this realistic? Is it even possible? I think it would be great to have some ways to test this. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, on that, Rick asked a question, what are the professional organizations that do participatory research in health and social care, climate change, environmental degradation, and planetary regeneration? You have a bunch of examples in your book. I'm wondering, yeah, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, if I could just respond, I did a Perplexity AI search because I belong to one, but I don't know what they are in the different sectors. And it would seem to make sense to have a network of participating research organizations across the different sectors because it's a common issue independent of the particular area they're focusing on. And I think it's grossly underestimated the power that we need to do in setting up community-based participatory research.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think there are some communities, I'll just say not organizations, but communities of practice that sort of just take it upon themselves to have conversations about this issue. But I'm not aware of any like organized entities that are trying to promote this, especially across different domains.
Yeah, I'm not either, but it just seems like a logical thing because I belong to
Wellness.
one in healthcare. And I'm thinking,
Yeah,
why isn't the one in social care? Why aren't we? I mean, this really requires a transsectoral approach because if you
yeah.
can't mass mobilize people to take charge of their own situation, we're going to be in a deeper trouble than we already are.
Completely agree. And that the irony of it is that everybody kind of knows that this is what should be done, but it just feels like there's something missing. And I can't pinpoint what it is, whether it's the will, whether it's politics, whether it's, agendas, but somehow, people would say, like, how do you do it? It's like, how do you do? Just do it. It's been kind of difficult to figure out what the issue is. I'm sure if you look back, decades from now, this conversation was already happening, but we still haven't been able to figure it out.
If I can just give a quick response to that, and then to the next person, which is having a framework of equity meta-governance, which is a cross-sector approach of dealing with wicked problems independent of the particular domain. That's what's missing.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, maybe this group can do that. We can make
We're sure trying.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I had a question inspired by Rick's question, which was, yeah, training, where the training is happening. Not just where the methodologies are being implemented, but I mean, this is, yeah, not like research methodologies taught, at least not in my university. And so, yeah, I'm curious if there are, Ian sent one example in the chat of a CUNY program that does these trainings, but Araba, I'm curious like where your training came from, or yeah, what that network of training of educational material and the wisdom, like where are those networks?
Yeah, I mean, in academia, we tend to specialize, right? So I mean, it's really difficult to find any programs where the goal is to say, how can we integrate Western and non-Western research methods? Because my point is not that we should shift to indigenous methods or traditional methods. My point is that we should try and find ways to use them together. And that is the real challenge. If you can find, a group of scientists that can do that truly, I mean, we've gone through what multidisciplinary research, interdisciplinary research, transdisciplinary. I think transdisciplinary now is the framing that's trying to do this. I don't know how successful it has been, but I think there are movements that are trying to see how we can do this work across domains, but I'm not sure yet across research traditions, because people are so invested in the meaning of those traditions, and if you break those down, then what's the point of your scholarship? So I think that's the challenge. And for me, I honestly was not particularly, especially trained in any of these. I was trained more, as I said, as a social scientist, and I'm more inclined towards qualitative research methods. But it feels like common sense to me, to be honest. And I think the more we can talk about it with people of like mind, maybe we can explore and try and find ways to actually productively, have conversations about how different research traditions can lead to better forms of knowledge.
I really appreciate the presentation, and sorry I came in late. I'm gonna have to go watch the first half of the recording. I wanted to jump in and say, when we mix methods, people from, at least what I've seen, people from the Western tradition of knowledge production are able to get paid for their part in the collaborative research, but the broad number of additional participants, of additional hypothesis generating, research conducting, thinking people are kind of left out in like a unfunded civic action space. And
Yeah.
I just want to say it's extremely productive to break down the boundaries between science and politics, but the institutions are not going to pay for that. It's a liberatory process.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do people think?
Yeah. Yeah, I cannot agree with you more. That's the sad thing about this. In fact, in the work we were doing, one of the issues that we were challenged by was like, was that we want to work with community organizations, but our budget was really small, really, really, really small for this project. And I mean, I think it was like $20,000. And we're like, you know, it's our job. Like, we are getting paid to do this work. But if we're asking for a community organization to collaborate with us, that's apart from their job that they already do. You know, so we're asking them to use their personal time effectively, or somehow to weave this into their everyday activities without any compensation other than the joy of, you know, being part of the project. And so we really, really, really struggled with that, and trying to find a way to give as much of that money as possible to the organizations that we were working with, not as payments per se, but as acknowledgement that we are taking, well, we're asking them to take time away from their work, and we don't want to interfere with the work of the organization. So, you know, one of the things we did with one of the organizations that we work with in Ghana, for example, we had a budget and we said, we have this small amount of money. What do you want to do? You tell us what you want to do with this money and we'll do it with you. And so that was how we tried to achieve some research together. So they chose the topic, they designed the research, and we just went along with it. But it is a challenge.
Did you previously reference anything about like the history of exclusion of participatory action research from the Academy? And my bandwidth may be lagging here. Did you hear that?
Oh yeah, we heard that. I think Araba, she had cut out earlier too, so I think she's having a little bit of an internet issue. But no, Liz, I didn't know about that or hear about like participatory action being excluded from academia.
I'm not the best person to give this history, but participatory action research and community-based participatory research was huge in the 60s and 70s. A roaring tradition that came out of Latin America. It was part of Freire's work with community liberation. It turned into, you know, peasant land back movements that, you know, the world over, that won, you know, hundreds of millions of acres of land returned back to the people who were stewarding it. And this work was driven by participatory action research, where that organized communities who were working towards self-governance and who knew they needed more knowledge in order to make better decisions. And this is a huge global movement. It goes even back farther, a century, to Kurt Lewin, who first created action research, and it's in the John Dewey philosophical tradition of that truth must be useful. Work of this kind has just not been able to get a foothold in formal institutions of higher education. So yeah, I guess I just want to say this is an enormous field that keeps getting rediscovered and has an institutionality problem. So yeah, it seems like people in the chat have a lot of ideas about that, and we could probably get someone better than me to give this history to us and help us imagine if there's anything that meta governors could do in response.
Go for it, Ian.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I have an unstable connection, so I was cutting in and out, but I did get the gist of your comments, and I do agree. I also think that one of the trends that
Oh no.
Oh, sorry, I was switching audio devices there. I was thinking, so earlier on, right, there was when you're presenting the work, and we lost her. Okay. Yeah, earlier when you were presenting the work, you were talking about how like this project in some ways was more practical, right? Like trying to create something useful, both in terms of like the problems of ocean governance, but also to the communities that you were working with. And I think that's another challenge sometimes in academia, right? It's like what academia might value is not necessarily something useful for addressing a problem, but often like creating academic problems or publications around something. And so the emphasis, even in like the outputs of grants, the training that people are given, it can be very challenging sometimes to connect that. Like I work in a field, like I'm a social worker by background, and like my PhD program is specifically like scholar practitioners. So there's a bit more of an alignment with a lot of community research and trying to make things that are useful. But even there's tensions that are sort of inescapable.
It seems like she keeps cutting out. Yeah, Ian, I'm curious if you've learned these methods or have done trainings like this before.
Yeah, I mean, like in my coursework, we cover participatory action and community-based participatory action, and like the public science project, which I put a link to in the chat, like they're well known for the summer institute they do every year. So they haven't announced anything yet, but it's typically in June. They try to prioritize researchers and community practitioners that are like actually embedded within community issues and problems rather than just academics who want to learn. And a lot of that tends to be New York focused. Like I had one professor who taught this fantastic course about the history and philosophy of statistics. He was a psychologist in his background. And some of the work that he drew from was this work with a group called the Morris Heights Justice Project, which this is probably more than 10 years ago. They were using surveys in a very participatory way to collect data about stop and frisk, the policy that really expanded under the Bloomberg administration that essentially was like preemptive searching and disproportionately targeted police encounters towards people of color, particularly in poor neighborhoods, that officially ended, although it's kind of now been reinstated under the current mayor in a different name. But this was all about a process of like collecting data about something that then got used to really try to change the policy. And their whole research design and the way the team was built, they even like recruit people sometimes who they would conduct surveys with, who then would end up. So kind of more like an organizing strategy. So it was a really fascinating thing to hear about. So I've been exposed to it. I haven't participated in those kind of projects myself, but I know they're around. I know people who do them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Araba, you're back now, so we see you, and yeah, no worries. Steve made a comment on just the funding side of things that's interesting. I mean, so Steve built an allocation, like resource allocation protocol that we've played with before with Metagov group. And Steve, I'm curious if you, no pressure, I know you're not feeling well, but want to speak any more into how, yeah, how your system or just a more participatory funding model kind of maps onto this work. Okay, no mic. No mic, fair enough. But yeah, I guess it would be, yeah, what you said of giving data gatherers the ability to decide how to use the funds, including paying themselves. And then you could almost imagine, I mean, communities with the power to decide where funding goes also, you know, deciding to fund the researchers who are kind of the bridge, let's say, into like the Western, you know, whatever institution that they're from, or perhaps the funders like are deploying researchers, right? But that like a more participatory funding protocol might give the communities more power over like the compensation for those researchers and the scope of that project relative to their work as data gatherers or, you know, other members of the research team. So, yeah.
Hey, I found my microphone.
Awesome.
So, I mean, the key thing about my protocol is that it is designed to not be gameable, which is to say that the main problem with a lot of distributed funding is that there are ways to participate in the system that people would consider cheating. And so that's what I'm trying to put forth here. It's a very open, it's transparent, but it innately has something I believe called incentive compatibility, which is you get the best results if you tell the truth. So I'm trying to prove that sort of mathematically right now, and I've been engaging with Jonathan about that a little bit, so that's been useful. But so I'll just kind of, you know, make you aware of how this is progressing. I have a little proof of concept that I'm developed, and I'm going to generalize it hopefully by the end of the month, and then I'll send it on to whoever is interested. But it's great for these sort of retroactive funding or any type of community distributing any type of funding where they want to make sure that there aren't power dynamics that give some people more control over where that funding goes than others.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is making sure that, or who gets to be involved in the allocation process, right, Steve? Like there's still a barrier there.
Yeah,
Or
if you have equal participants, there's still a group, and you're either, you know, enfranchised or not. Yeah, it's sort of binary the way it's set up. So you certainly want to have representation in that core group proportional to the underlying, you know, stakeholders that are being represented. So, you know, you might have 100 people making allocation decisions or 1,000 people making allocation decisions or whatever else, but you want to decide, you know, the proportions of that group fairly well.
yeah, I'd encourage you to be explicit about that in your writing on the tool.
Sounds good.
All right, other questions that popped up here. Differences and similarities between participatory action research and community-based participatory research.
Yeah, I just put a link in there. I was just curious. The question was triggered by the previous speaker, so I thought I'd do a quick search on it.
Yeah, Araba, do you identify as a participatory action researcher, or is that like is that the lineage that you're kind of shepherding and bringing forth, or is this like different or similar?
I think I'm hesitating to speak because I feel like as soon as I speak, my connection drops, but let's see how it goes. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely what I aspire towards. I wouldn't say that I have been successful, especially in the academic setting I was working in. That wasn't a research approach that was easy to get the resources to implement. So we just try to get as close as possible to that as we can. But I almost feel like the living lab kind of idea would come closest to what I wish I could do. Whereas not that you're seeing a place as a lab, but I mean, the whole of life is a lab, right? We're all experimenting in one way or other. So sort of, you know, having that approach to research where it's just integrated into the
Oh, darn. Well, I also can't believe how lost I got in that, and we are way over time. So I'm sorry for keeping y'all so over. Oh, hey, Araba, you're back.
Not to speak again.
Yeah, no worries. I heard what you said on kind of living lab. Um,
Yeah.
I love that frame and oh no. Oh no, you're back. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize that we're so over time, so I'm sorry for keeping everyone so over, but that's a sign of a good conversation. So yeah, I would love to, I'll follow up with you, make sure you have a link to our Slack where we can continue over there and maybe there is I saw you're hopefully can connect with Liz, who's our executive director at Metagov, and hopefully we can have you back and maybe do some kind of like workshop, more hands-on use. I would love to do some of the worksheets in your book, basically. I would love to experiment with them. So yeah, awesome.
All right, let's sweep it up for her. Whoop, 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 whoop. Come on.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, let's give Araba
Yeah,
a round
it's
of applause.
wonderful. Beautiful.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Great.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy
Have a
holidays.
holiday and see you all soon. All right.
Bye.